Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Dami and I'm an architect based in Vancouver, BC. Have you ever felt stuck in your career and imagined yourself transitioning into a completely new path? Well, my guest today has done that several times. Evelyn started her career in architecture and after becoming a licensed architect, transitioned to working for an organization that connects architects with nonprofits. Then she decided to go and get her MBA and her MPA. She worked as a strategic lead, she worked as a managing director for a commercial real estate firm, and she now works as a senior experience designer at Slack. She is also the founder of Practice of Architecture and now their new podcast, Practice Disrupted, where they help people and practices find new ideas for growth in a world that is constantly changing. She's also the first female treasurer of the AIA Nationals Board. We are living in incredibly uncertain times, but also very exciting times. Entire industries are changing. Traditional roles are being challenged, and job security is definitely not guaranteed, and job satisfaction is more nebulous than ever. So in this interview, Evelyn and I talk about her various career transitions, some practical tips for young architects, and we also talk about the industry and the need for architecture firms to break out of the traditional method of practice so that they can be more relevant, more involved, and more profitable. It was very interesting for me to hear her point of view, especially because I have been questioning the direction of the industry myself, as well as my own career path. So I hope you find it interesting. So here it is. Could you just talk about your career, like all your career pivots a little bit and
Sorry, how long do you have? Well, I don't know. I mean, I think if anything, I would hope that people know that a career is really a journey. I was always one of those individuals that wanted to be an architect. I don't know, ever since I was in the 4th grade. I was one of those silly architects that knew, like, at a super young age, like, I want to be an architect without knowing what an architect actually did until I became an architect. And I realized I was so disconnected from the end users of our buildings, even though I was designing schools and community centers. My time was spent more with the city and county staff we were working with, or the school board, than the actual students and the actual teachers and the people in the community. And that's where I wanted to spend my time, hearing those voices, because I felt that that was where I could make the biggest impact. So I ultimately left architecture to go work for a nonprofit organization up here in the Bay Area called Public Architecture, and manage a program which it's now called the 1+ program, but essentially was established pre the Great Recession, when architects were we were doing really well. The economy is in a high swing, and we were asking architects to give 1% of their billable hours towards the public good pro bono, which, if you think about it collectively, would mean that it would be the biggest pro bono design firm globally. So the premise was super interesting, but a lot of the architects were having problems finding nonprofit organizations to actually serve and create projects with. So I was the first person to come on and look at how do we create those partnerships with nonprofit organizations. And then I realized, even myself as an architect, although then unlicensed, working towards licensure, I was really ill-equipped to talk about the value proposition. And I think architects always talk about, we need to be much better about how we talk about our value and deliver, because we're always underpricing our services and people don't understand our value. Well, I felt that I wasn't fully able to articulate that to the nonprofit organizations. And it was clear that the nonprofit organizations and the majority of the public only felt that, you know, architects are only needed if you have a new ground up building, right? Not necessarily like architects can even rearrange your space to help get better operations and processes going, or that by doing certain things to your existing space, you actually could raise the potential of donors and the amount that donors are willing to give, just purely because you come off as more professional and organized in the way you present yourself. So I took that notion and I went back to school to get my MBA. I ended up tagging on an MPA, which is public administration, because ultimately the MBA is much more qualitative and I felt, or quantitative, and I felt the MPA is much more qualitative. And it was about research methodologies used at the community level to gather information and then use that data to make decisions at the civic level. And I figured that I could use that to play out at a lot of different various consulting paths. I landed at a consulting group called MK Think. Actually, it's an architecture and design group called MK Think that had a strategic studio as one of its core competencies. And I led that for multiple years. I went to work with a firm, a friend actually, on the consultant side of workplace experience consulting at several different brokerages with the same team. Our team moved between brokerages. And then I ended up taking that workplace experience and transitioning it to Slack internally on the client side. So that's where I am now.
Right. So a lot of pivots. So just to backtrack a little bit, when you went to do your MBA, because I think there are quite a few architects who want to pivot their careers, they go in and do their MBA. Mm-hmm. Did you have a clear idea of what kind of job you wanted to do after getting the MBA?
No, I mean, that was an unusual journey for me too. It sounds like I had an idea. I really didn't. But I was in a point in my life where I didn't know what the next step was. I was really struggling, honestly, internally, because I had wanted to be an architect for so long. And then I kind of felt a loss of identity, because I was like, well, if I don't want to be an architect, then what do I want to be? I was younger. I didn't have a family. I didn't have a boyfriend. I had no connections. And I just kind of took the risk and what I felt was actually a much needed break. So I actually, there's all of these, there's even within the MBA program, there's these groups like the Green Building Club or the Real Estate Development Club or the Building Tech Club. And I actually specifically it's like, what if I just take a break from architecture altogether and explore if anything speaks to me? And it was actually through that break that I realized I needed to do something that aligned a little bit more closely with architecture, because I actually missed it. But yeah, it's like, if I were to go do that now, I think, as a mother, now married, it's much harder. It would be much harder, honestly, for me to make that decision to do that now. So it was kind of like a right time, right place. And I just took the risk and took on the debt and kind of just dove head in.
Right. You let serendipity guide you.
I did, but I knew, and maybe I was a bit naive, but I felt like, well, at the very least, I come out of this with an MBA. So I've got to be able to leverage that into another role somehow. So I felt like, I wasn't just sitting around doing nothing, trying to figure out what's next. I felt like I was like actively pursuing what's next.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if you could have gone back before you did your MArch, would you have just done the MBA?
No. And I think And maybe things are all serendipity. I do think like, I think luck, there is an amount of luck in life. But as my husband has said multiple times to me, I think like some of the things that we find comes out of luck is also happens out of good intention and planning ultimately.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why I went and got my MArch after I finished my BArch, so it was a post-professional type of 3-month degree, was because my BArch was so technical. And I really wanted to explore the theoretical side of architecture. I felt like there was a lot of things going on in computer graphics or just computer modeling that we weren't touching in my undergrad. And I didn't know enough. I mean, how many people know in high school that architecture programs are so different? I mean, I thought I knew a lot of this as senior, but I knew enough to go and look for an accredited program, but I didn't realize like the huge swings in the differences in curriculum that those accredited programs could really provide you.
Mm-hmm.
So I did it because I wanted a theater, like I felt like I was missing an important part of my education. And I wouldn't take that back because I actually did this incredible scenario planning studio with Natalie DeVries from MVR plus D.
MVRDV.
Or MVRDV, yes, sorry. It was in the MR plus D program, but Natalie of MVRVD, she and Michael Speaks led this scenario planning studio, which at a core was a lot of how do you gather data to make decisions on a broader scale, what type of community engagement do you need? And it was strategic planning. So ultimately, if I look at the arc of everything I've done, that was my favorite studio throughout all of my education. If I had realized that sooner, I think I may have been able to actually get to my career path sooner. But it took me a while for me to realize that's the type of thing that I actually want to be doing. So, I mean, hindsight, no. I would have, if I had gone and done my MBA, I would have missed out on that.
Right. Your path is kind of interesting because I think a lot of people find that their BArch is a little bit too theoretical and it's not technical enough.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting that you went back to do your MArch to get more of that theoretical experience.
Yeah. I also had this romantic notion of wanting to be a teacher that has never come to fruition. So,
well, you're kind of a teacher now because you're,
I guess,
doing all these interviews.
That's a decent point. Yeah. Thanks for that.
So, okay, yeah, that's interesting. So because I think the notion is that the academics have to be more grounded in reality. The architectural schooling has to be more grounded in reality and be more relevant. And it's the academics that have to catch up with the industry, not the other way around.
I think that's an ongoing argument, right, between academics and practitioners. I mean, for me, the theoretical side is more important because that's where you learn approaches to problem solving, and that's an implementation and execution, and that's a little bit different than, I don't know. So maybe we'll get around to this, but the way we approach traditional practice is kind of failing, I think, our profession a little bit. It's the business model is failing. So I would hate to see education focus on purely creating people that can create construction documents when that's kind of the lowest denominator of our value that we provide as architects. I would much rather see education producing interesting and unique problem solvers and systemic thinkers, because I think that's where our value really is.
Right. And that's the work that you're doing with practice of architecture. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So I've become very public about the need for what I see traditional practice to evolve. I actually really enjoyed my time at MK Think because it provided a unique platform as a strategic thinker and as a leader, one of the leaders of the strategy group, at a what I would consider a small to medium sized firm. So a lot of people, when they think about strategy, right, they think like, oh, it's the Genslers and the HOKs and the Perkins and Wills who can only afford kind of the overhead to pay for strategists and researchers. MK Think was this medium-sized firm that really made strategy its core competency. And the revenue it brought in was on par, if not above, I feel, what the architects brought in, partly because we could even just charge more from an hourly rate perspective. So it's a good model of how we can evolve traditional practice, even at a smaller scale, and expand our services and raise our value and have more touch points with our clients. And I think it's a model that more architecture firms need to follow to remain relevant and to be, I hear a lot of architects talk about how, they want to be, the first person that a client picks up the phone with when they need to discuss something about business or intricacies, or they want to be that go-to knowledge asset. And we swim in such a narrow lane that it's hard for clients to fully understand that we have other capabilities until we start actively participating in other areas.
Right. Trying to get the architect more into the phase zero.
Right. So I guess the long story short, now I'll get off my soapbox, was that practice of architecture was kind of founded to help architects think more about the other services that they can be providing, to really bring in examples from other industries about how we can even change our approaches to business development and marketing.
What are some of the examples?
Okay, so, and I don't know, hopefully this is not a replay of a previous comment I made in another interview, but a good example would be, for instance, I've seen a lot more architects advertising on Instagram right now. And when you click through a lot of them, I actually reached out, every time this happened, I reached out to them directly. When they click through, a lot of them, you just land on their website, which is great. I mean, I guess you're engaging your numbers on your website are going up, but you're not getting paid on the amount of clicks that you get on your website, right? So anytime that you do not put a contact form in front of that click, or just after that click, it's like an opportunity, it's a lost lead, right? Like that was a person who you got interested in, but you didn't do anything to capture their information. So even simple things like that, where if you click on every single other Instagram ad, I'm sure you get here's 5 quick tips to download, give me your name and email address. So, even something as small as that is something that I think we can learn from.
Right. Yeah. I think the whole marketing through online is fairly new to a lot of firms, and they still have this notion that it's word of mouth, which is a really big part of how you get clients, but word of mouth or reference, and they don't really take the time to advertise or learn how to advertise in these different media streams.
Yeah. And then there's simple things that, so the architecture firm that I worked for a long time, we were still doing time cards in Excel. Like there's just simple things that you can automate, so it's just not as tedious of a process, and then you can use that time on other things to build your business. So those are like the more simple things. The harder things is just, how do you look at your current talent pool and your current clients and identify potential services that you could be selling above and beyond what you're doing right now.
So one of the things that you were selling at MK Think was strategizing on how you can use the spaces rather than just doing the construction.
and we did get into operations and processes in some instances, but I would say it was strategic consulting, and that sometimes you even go to the large consulting firms for, but it's around the built environment. So like one project that I wasn't directly put on, but it's one of the more interesting ones to tell, is that we were working with the San Francisco Unified School District. So a lot of students, for instance, rely on school for their food. So they were looking at, what is the cost on the district versus the gain to the children, to one, provide an additional meal. So can they do breakfast and lunch? And then how do they what are the operational processes based on their current facilities to provide like a good healthy alternative meal. So the group went in and they took account of every single piece of kitchen equipment in every school that had a kitchen. And then they set up like, where do we need to centralize the kitchen for San Francisco Unified District? And based on the equipment available at the other kitchens, how far do we need to par cook the food before we deliver it on site? And how do we optimize kind of our delivery stream to save the most money as we can so we can serve the most students? So that was, it's space related, but it also has like a social justice overlay to it. And it was, was serving the community. So that was the type of strategic work that we were involved in.
So was that completely separated from the construction work, or did that eventually funnel in or was that a method of funneling in the architecture work?
I would say, so the strategic work we considered strategy a strategic studio. So sometimes it led to construction work, sometimes it didn't, but at any rate, it always provided us an opportunity to expand the different clients that we were working with. We didn't end up on the implementation side of that one. There was, I'm still working on and off. I have a longstanding partnership with UC Hastings that I established when I was at MK Think, and I am still doing work for them with them to this day. But essentially, we did the long-range strategic plan for their campus, and the CFO is keeping me on to make sure that we implement successfully against that long-range strategic plan. So I've been on the client side in that case, then selecting the architects to build, or are part of the architect selection, and helping the university do programming and planning. And now we're supporting them on wayfinding and signage, because they have a distributed urban campus. It's an urban campus with multiple different buildings. So yeah, we're finding lots of different ways to support them strategically. That doesn't necessarily always end up with a building. And there will always be the architects that, one, don't consider me an architect anymore, which is, I feel, hurtful, but I'll get over it. But two, because I very much consider what I'm doing like still architecturally related. I draw from my architectural background a lot. But two, I think, there will be those individuals that, like, if I'm not doing a building, I'm not an architect. And to that, I just have to say, again, these opportunities provide additional value to your clients. They will be calling you when they don't need a building, which means that they will absolutely be calling you when they do need a building. But if we're such a relationship-based service provider, then these opportunities are really expanding those relationships.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think even at a smaller scale, I was just speaking to an architect that's the video that I posted in the Women in Architecture group. It was the architect who works with Indigenous communities. Mm-hmm. And he's a sole proprietor, but even he's very involved in like the initial stages of the project where they're trying to get funding, where they're trying to strategize on how they can build up their like employment employment rates in the community, and doesn't necessarily translate into an architectural project, but like it's a part of his services. He doesn't really market it that way, but it is. And it sometimes leads to architectural work, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, it seems like being able to be a part of that decision-making process right in the beginning is where architects should all want to go.
Right. I mean, if you're in that position, then you're usually actually the ones helping set the budget, for a capital campaign. And quite frankly, I actually like being on on the client side and being the one who's hiring the architects, because then I can take that and I can say like, okay, I end up reaching out to a lot of architects who actually don't make it, who aren't selected to build our projects at Slack, and just say, the next interview you go into, here's kind of five to 7 tips that you might want to consider, and that's different to your approach to really make you stand out.
Can you talk about those tips?
Okay, super high level. I mean, I think this is the most obvious one, because I've been the diversity hire that people drag along to interview. Right. But if you are going to so blatantly do that, make sure that those individuals actually have a voice in the presentation, and they're not just like a pretty face that's sitting and smiling throughout the presentation. So that would be like a really, really easy one. But sometimes like a principal is not going to change that internally. Like, I feel like the individual that got dragged along could probably not say that to the principal of the firm, which is with as much impact as I could as a potential client, saying you didn't show us the value of your team because you didn't let your entire team speak. So I feel like as somebody who's hiring the architects, I almost I'm giving the principals a business case, right, for changing what they're doing, versus the internal person struggling, saying, I really wish I could have a voice, during these interviews.
Right. Do you have any tips for architecture students who are in school right now? Because I feel like the industry is changing so much, especially with COVID, that I think a lot of people are going to have to be equipped with skills outside of architecture, but they're skills that are not really defined. So yeah, how would you?
Yeah, I mean, it's so dear. I would as a student, I think people always want to talk to students and help guide careers, right? Or help students figure out the next path. This was even true in my late 20s when I went back to school, and I would just say like, hi, I'd reach out to people and say, hi, I'm an MBA student. I would really like to learn more about your path. Like, do you mind connecting? I would say a little bit more what I'm more specifically interested in learning about somebody's path, and then ask for like a 10 to 15 minute phone call, which usually in the best case scenario always turned into a half hour or hour long phone call. But I think if you're kind of struggling with how do I use these skills I'm getting in architecture school, and where do I want to end up, and if it's not necessarily in traditional practice, like now is your opportunity to kind of create an identity on a network like LinkedIn, and kind of just cold email people that you are interested in learning a bit more about how they got there. There's so many new jobs and fields that have opened up, I think in the last 10 years, that you will find that a lot of people that are in these positions, one might be like data visualization. Like, even if you think about kind of how, like, even the elections, right? How much more data you see on television screens right now about like where elections are headed, how the vote's going, versus how people just usually talked to that data before. So there's been this whole new data viz career that's taken off. and that's happened, I think, with like, that's really accelerated within the last 5 years. So people that are in that field right now are relatively new to the field themselves. So like, here's a great opportunity to see, like, how did you identify that career path? What actually led you there? What steps did you need to take? And just be the inquisitive student that you already are, and ask those questions. And I think by asking a lot of questions, you'll get to answers about your own career sooner.
Mm-hmm. I think you also mentioned in the other interview with Joanne that it's like, if you are looking for a career pivot, it's really hard to get a job just by like cold resume. It's usually through networking. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's always, especially within the tech world, I mean, I was extremely lucky, but I think it's always easier to get a referral from somebody within the company than it is to do like the cold email. So so if you have these informational interviews and then something comes up like in their company and you haven't even reached out to a person for like 6 months, I think it's easy enough to say, I really enjoyed our conversation. It was aspirational. I saw this interview, or I saw this opening that I saw pop up on your career site, and I just wanted to let you know that I was applying. If you could put in a good word for me, that would be wonderful. And I'd like to find out more about it. Could you redirect me to the hiring manager, or would you be willing to have a conversation? It just, and this is true of architecture firms too, right? So even if you don't want to leave traditional practice, which there are definitely people who want to stay in it and are like, I was never a good designer. There's definitely good designers who I think need to stay in architecture. But even then, like, you could do these same informational interviews with architecture firms, and you'll actually find that principles are much more accessible. Again, when you're coming from the point of like, I'm a student, I've seen your work on this, I see your talk, your article, can I get 10 to 15 minutes of your time? So just think about like what an impact that leaves. And when later you are going through the recruiting team and you can say, hey, I talked to your principal earlier about your firm, and this is what I'm really excited about. So, yeah.
Right. And what about, so I think a lot of people, you also talked about cleaning up your Google presence, making sure that everything that's on there is what you want people to see.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a political voice, even in this climate, but I just think that you should be aware of everybody reading that, and that, I mean, even the things that we're doing at the AIA, and even our statement, our stronger statement that came out regarding Black Lives Matter, and it's a device, or it's dividing, right? We did not bring the entire membership along with that statement. So just know that, just be aware that what you say may turn some people off. And if you're okay with that, then by all means, like, use your voice. But if you're not okay with being judged on what you're saying out in public, then just don't say it out in public.
Right. What about if you have I think a lot of people have like a side income, side hustle, and let's say their webpage leads straight to that, which might not correlate exactly with like where they want to go with their careers.
Right.
What do you think about that?
That's an interesting one. I mean, I've always been very public about my side hustles. I started writing back in, I don't know, 2004, before writing for a blog was actually a thing. I've always been very clear, but I've also been very clear because I want whomever I work with to appreciate the fact that I'm engaged there. But again, like, I think you just have to realize the people you are attracting and the people you might be discouraging with whatever you put out there. And know that, and there's definitely firms that are going to be like, you can't have a side hustle. So the truth of it is, one, I would not want to work for those firms, but like two, like they would very quickly find out, and they would probably just not pursue me either. So I mean, I guess I would just say, like, be honest and true to who you are, and realize what you're putting out there, and who that attracts and who that scares away. So.
And eventually you'll find the right match that appreciates you for who you are.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I think there is the ability for all of us to craft that. I also think, like, I've definitely had those jobs where it was just a job and I needed an income. And that's okay. Like, I learned from those too. So, sometimes you end up there, but it's any job you're in is only temporary until you're ready, until you find the next thing. So manage your expectations around that as well.
Well, can you talk about that a little bit, like your transition phase? I think you wrote an article pretty recently about William Bridges' book, Job Shift.
Oh, yeah, that was one of our collaborators on Practice of Architecture. So I didn't write that. Laura Weiss actually wrote that.
Right. Okay. Well, did you read it? Did you read the book?
I read the article. I haven't read the book. I mean, the interesting thing about Laura, though, is she is a generation. So I'm Generation X. I would say she is a generation older than me, and she made her last career pivot just within the last year. So I guess the biggest lesson there is that, like, it's never too late in your career.
Right.
Even if you have given all of this time to, a profession. I've been talking to a lot of people about one thing that architects in particular, they struggle with is, like, we see our career, especially if you go into traditional practice, it's this very linear path, right? Like, everyone's focused on, you should get your license. Then once you get your license, you must be on this somewhere on the partner or principal partner track. I think that's kind of detrimental to career building over the long term, because then we forget, like, there's other opportunities, and then we get in our own way because we've committed so much time to this path. Like how could I ever step off of it?
Yeah, you have to design your careers as much as you design the project.
Absolutely.
Sorry. So just to go back to that transition phase a little bit. So in that article, they're talking about the crosswalk, right? And as soon as you leave the sidewalk, people just want to get to the other side. But I think what Bridges was saying is that, like, you want to try to stay in that. Yeah, that was a great metaphor. So Can you talk a little bit about, like, what that phase of your life was like, that experience?
Yeah, I will. I mean, so this happened recently, actually. And I've been half public about it. And you know what? My people at Slack know. So I recently joined a coaching program. It is a 5-figure investment on my part to grow the practice of architecture. So for me, I had to sit with this decision for 2 to 3 weeks to really kind of decide, like, is that something I want to take? And I was like, I was questioning my own ability to ever make back that money that I'm now asking my family to give up. So yeah, like, that was like the stepping off point, right? But I decided to go for it, and I'm all in it. And we have a forthcoming partnership announcement that we're announcing later today, that like that. So the class, the business coaching class, already put me in this new mindset that's going to accelerate my ability to make meaningful impact in the practice of architecture if I had just, like, tried to do it on my own. but yeah, it was not a decision that I took lightly, and it was one that involved my husband and our finances and where we were and what we would have to move around or postpone because of this decision. So yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine decisions like that get harder and harder as you get older in your life.
Yeah. Make all the tough decisions now when you're younger. Yeah. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, I'm grateful for having such a supportive husband. But yeah, like that, like the stepping off part is always the hardest, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
But also, like, after I got over the hump and we committed, I'm fully committed to making that money back for my family too. So that's definitely a motivator.
Your husband's just like watching over you. Do the work.
I know. Before he was like, why are you staying up till 2 a.m. like doing this practice of architecture that isn't making up like really any money? And now he's like, you better stay up until 2 a.m. No, just he's not like that at all. But it definitely was an internal mindset like shift. Like, yeah.
Right. Well, I think like you've already found a successful career path in tech, but you're coming back to architecture and trying to help architects find their path and helping them expand their vision of what they could do. So I love that. And I really appreciate that.
Well, I do love architects. So that's never been an issue with me. It's just how we do business. I want more architects to be successful. So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you're on the board at the AIA as well, right?
I am. I joke that I'm often the fly on the wall, like the one non-traditional architect on the very small national board. I'm actually the treasurer right now, and I'm trying to refocus us in terms of like, how do we find, what are other partnerships that we can create? What are other mechanisms that we can use to drive revenue as a membership organization that doesn't so heavily rely on our members paying to be a part of it. So, and especially at times like this. So that's kind of where my focus is, being there in addition to just being an active participating member.
Mm-hmm. So are they on board with this new approach to practice? With like,
I mean, no, I like, no, but they don't have to be, right. I was voted on by my peers. I also ran unopposed because honestly, no one wants to be a treasurer. And this is not a fun year to be a treasurer, nor is next year. I actually think next year is going to be much harder for us. So nor is next year going to be a fun year to be a treasurer. Mm-hmm. But I see it as a strategic opportunity. There are definitely people that respect my different point of view, whether or not they're willing to change their practice to follow what I'm saying, and I'm equally respectful of what they need to do, and what they think they need to do to continue. But should they ever want to change, I will be here to help and support them.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that the role of the architect is so entrenched in traditional practice?
There's so much. Yeah. Wow. That's like a huge, like we could spend an entire afternoon, I think, unpacking that one. I think it's just, a lot of it I think has to do with this age-old apprenticeship model of like how we go through leadership transition in our firms, or actually how we don't go through leadership transition in our firms. A lot of it I think is just even the culture, the studio culture that we came out of. So on a podcast actually coming up on Practice Disrupted in a few weeks, we talked to two past AIAS, so American Institute of Architecture student leaders, who actually codified kind of uh, they codified studio culture, or like the rights of the student in studio culture, into the NAB, the National Architecture. Now I'm getting like too deep in this. The National Architecture Accreditation Board, like the requirements to become an accredited program. And it's been interesting. It was an interesting conversation to me, because what I learned out of that is that my experience in studio has been very different than the experience of students coming out of studio today. Like, my studio was much, and the whole thing that drove studio culture was the fact that, you know, a student's life was lost staying up 48 hours, you know, getting in a car accident, like preparing for finals. Not to say that's not funny anymore, but I mean, not to say honestly, not to say that isn't happening anymore, but I do feel because architects, architectural schools are still referred to as lighthouses on campuses, but there is like, but I feel like the studio culture that students are graduating out of right now is much more collaborative and less competitive than the studio culture that I graduated out of. And the studio culture that I graduated with perpetuates this firm culture of, we can't share anything with our peers. We can't share anything with even people in our firm until they're quote unquote ready, or they've like gone through this rite of passage. That's really kind of held us in this traditional practice model. Whereas, like, you know, I see a lot of collaboration and a bigger entrepreneurial spirit coming out of the next generation. But I also see them struggling because they're going into these firms with firm leaders that graduated in my studio culture. So if we can get through that dynamic, then hopefully we can come out on the other side. But it's just like a weird dynamic happening right now. That's and there's just a lot of older leadership still in firms that's just perpetuating kind of what they grew out of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's just one of like so many reasons why we can't get out of traditional practice. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's changing now too with COVID. Everything has moved online.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen to that collaborative studio culture.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Although I just talked to a friend who they're actually creating a virtual space for students, it's not dissimilar from Second Life, for like the academic perspective and like studio. So
oh, cool.
So there's definitely people out there that are pushing kind of even where we're headed from a digital practice standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Right. I don't know if you've heard of Seth Godin's Alt MBA.
I have, yeah.
And so their model is like everyone who's in the class is participating. Like everyone has their webcam turned on. Mm-hmm. So that it is really like being in a classroom, because, you know, it doesn't work if you just play a recording or just do a one-way Zoom call, right?
Right. Absolutely. And you even see this happening in firms more, right? Like we had video conferencing capability so long ago, but even in GoToMeetings and Zoom, like rarely would anybody actually turn on their video cameras. So like, you know, so the pandemic has kind of perpetuated at least seeing everyone's face like on the other end of a video conference rather than the agenda or just the presentation that you're presenting.
Mm-hmm. And the way that people are learning is very different too.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's going to democratize architecture.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
That could be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah. And it kind of goes back to you talking about your role as a teacher, right? I mean, I think like what you're doing with the podcast and the videos, I think that's probably like a more effective way of teaching younger people in some ways than like the role of the studio instructor.
I mean, I appreciate that view. So thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've never really looked at myself that way. Maybe I should, but I've definitely, especially now, tried to make myself available for people that have had questions about career switching um, and just my own path and the next steps that they should take.
Right. Okay. Do you have any final tips for young architects?
No, just hang in there. I don't know, hang in there. One of the things that I really love about my current employer, and by no means am I trying to commercialize this, but one of the things so Slack orientation for one was it's like a half week long event. We're also onboarding like 20 new people a week, like which, coming from an architecture world, like I can't imagine a firm onboarding 20 new people a week. So we have a very intense orientation program, but one of the things that they say the first day that resonates, that I wish more architecture firms would say, and if they aren't saying it to you, I hope it doesn't silence your voice at all, is that your life experiences makes you a contributor from day one. So speak up, have a voice, have an opinion. If you find yourself at a firm that doesn't allow you to do that, then maybe you haven't landed at the right firm, and you should take that into consideration. But there are definitely firms out there that are willing to give you a voice from day one, and I think that's important. I learn a lot from the younger people that I talk to. It's sad to think that I'm on the older end of things these days, but yeah, I learned a lot and respect that. So I appreciate the incoming generation and the voice that they bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also the strength of the firms from the older generation to be more dynamic and change to the way that younger people are doing things. So what did you think about the interview? I would really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. You can find resources and really insightful articles at www.practiceofarchitecture.com. And you can also listen to their podcast, Practice Disrupted, where they interview industry leaders and explore technology and cultural shifts, getting you to think about how you can adjust your career and your practice to some of these emerging trends. Practice of Architecture also just recently launched a career assist program with an organization called Teal, where they help people wanting to transition into new career roles. If you enjoyed this video, please leave me a thumbs up, and I would really love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So that's it for today, and I'll see you in the next one.